emergency room at the start of my shift with no idea what was wrong with her. According to her fiancé, the patient, Lisa Myers, just collapsed while brushing her teeth. It was a slow night in the hospital, so I spent more time with Lisa than I usually would. I took her vitals and did all the prep. She was stable but unresponsive. I spent a decade as a nurse, most of it in an ED or operating room, and I thought back then that I'd seen every mad, awful thing there was in this world. But the night the woman with the coma came in, I got to see a little preview of hell. It started when they moved Lisa to a private room. I was there as we hooked her up and tried to make her comfortable. She was beautiful, maybe 30 or 35, with auburn hair and delicate features. There were no signs of obvious illness or injury other than her nose, which would not stop bleeding. Lisa's fiancé, Tom, was a panicked mess. He rambled off a dozen questions a minute, pacing around Lisa's bed and cleaning his glasses over and over like it would help him see a solution to the woman's sickness. "Has anything like this ever happened before?" I asked. Tom started to shake his head, then hesitated. "She's never gone out like this in the past," he said. "But she's been having headaches and nosebleeds for the past few weeks, ever since a work trip." "Has she gone to the doctor for those symptoms?" No. I asked her to, but she just said it was a migraine." I made a note in Lisa's chart. "What does your wife do for work?" I don't know." That made me look up sharply. Tom was struggling with something, looking between his comatose fiancée and me. Tom took a breath. "I know she works for the government. She's a scientist, something with minerals. It's all hush-hush, but Lisa seems to like the work." "What do you do for work, if you don't mind me asking?" Tom grinned. "High school history teacher." I got ready to ask more questions, but bit them back when I noticed the lights in the room were growing brighter. A power surge? Tom noticed something was wrong as well, and reflexively put a protective hand on Lisa's shoulder. The lights reached a blazing point, then quickly dimmed until the room was as dark as an early winter morning. I watched, rooted to the floor, as the room experienced the ebb and flow of brightness and dimness until the lights flickered and died. They were only out for a moment before the backups kicked on, but I heard shouts and even a scream from the hallway. "What's going on?" Tom asked, still holding Lisa's hand. "I'm not sure, but everything will be fine," I said. "Just stay here, and I'll be right back." A few patients were poking their heads out from their rooms. A cluster of hospital staff, including a maintenance guy, gathered around one of the monitor banks. I began to walk over to them, then slowed, then stopped, then stood dumbstruck as I watched a stray stethoscope lying on a nearby table float into the air. Other small objects were also beginning to rise. A tray here, a chart there, even a crash cart. I felt a tug and realized that my hair was drifting upwards. The anomaly ended and the floating material came raining down. The entire hallway of patients and staff seemed to be in a state of shock. I was still trying to find the words to ask what just happened when the first boom shook the hospital. My first thought was, bomb. But it wasn't an explosion. It was more like a battering ram or a rock dropped off a cliff. The boom came again, and I saw a crater form at the far end of the hall. The tile cracked as if under some massive, focused weight. Another hole blossomed 5 feet ahead of the first. It was like footsteps. A stunned old woman in a hospital gown stood near the second crater gripping her IV tower. She'd come out of her room to check on the commotion. There was a strange hiss audible down the entire hallway. The old woman burst like a pimple, splattering the wall behind her with a red wash. A doctor a few steps away suddenly launched into the air, his body slamming into the ceiling and then into the floor, breaking on impact. Panic, screaming and more booming steps. Clouds of blood and body parts and people erupted like tiny, wet volcanoes. I watched another nurse running towards me, only to be yanked up into the air, suspended for a moment, and then slammed against the wall. Something was killing everyone around me, and I couldn't see it. An invisible force that was moving through us like a blender. I finally shook myself free and ran as the entity crashed into the nurse's station midway down the hallway. I heard an alarm going off. The hospital was going into lockdown. Security must have triggered it from the ground floor. They could see the carnage from the CCTV, but wouldn't understand what was happening. Not that I had a much better idea. What I did know, though, was a lockdown would trap all of us in the hospital with the thing. I spotted a fire alarm on the wall and ran for it. At least, if the fire department showed up, someone could help us. Even if they ended up needing to call the police or National Guard or the damn Space Force. The sprinklers came on when I pulled the alarm, and I got my first look at the creature. It was only an outline in the water, but it was clearly shaped like a person. A small woman, actually. I expected something bigger, alien, malicious. But the woman didn't seem evil. In fact, as she walked closer, and I once again found myself too scared to run, I saw the form of her face. She was screaming, silently, a look of absolute, perfect agony across her features. "Lisa?" a voice said from behind me in the hall. I turned and saw Tom standing, staring at the thing outlined by the sprinklers. He was right. Even though I'd only just seen his fiancée, the entity did resemble the woman in the coma down to the same delicate, bleeding nose. Tom took a step towards the creature, then another. He moved past me, hands raised in a calming gesture. I wondered then if he lied before, if Lisa had been sick in the past or showed some sign of whatever was going on. Astral projection, telekinesis, a ghost or a soul on a rampage. Tom reached for the figure, and I heard a gentle pop. His arm floated from the elbow up in front of us. "Lisa?" he asked a moment before his other arm came off, followed by his head. I ran, slipping on the slick tiles, and crawled away. My scrubs were dark with water, and I moved without thinking, not knowing where to go, only that I had to put distance between me and the projection. There was an open door ahead of me. I wiggled in and kicked it shut. The lights were dim again. I looked around. There was a patient lying still in the bed. Lisa. I heard crashing outside and a scream. A plan flowed into my mind like poison poured into a cup. In all my years as a nurse, I'd spent every day trying to save lives. Not once did I try to take one. That's why it felt so unnatural when I took the pillow from behind Lisa's head. She looked peaceful, but I remembered the contorted features of the thing in the hallway, the pain she must be in. Maybe it was causing her to lash out. Maybe she'd gone mad. It didn't matter. I decided that I wanted to live, so I placed the pillow over the woman's face and leaned down. After about a minute, the sounds from outside the room stopped, replaced by a familiar, sharp ring. A flat line from Lisa's life support. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and smash that like button to get notified every time I upload a new video. You can also check out some more of my animated horror stories right here.